All right, this video is about the Axial Yeti XL and how to get the steering to work on this thing. This is a cool 8th scale buggy. Everything about it's pretty nice, but the steering out of the box is terrible. So I've messed around with it for a couple of weeks. I finally got the steering working pretty well. And I just want to tell you everything I did to make it work. So here we go, let's get started. So first of all, talk about the servo. Stock servo is this Tactic TSX 45. It's being powered by a 5.5 volt ESC voltage. This servo makes about 150 ounce-inches of torque. It's not enough for this vehicle. Second servo I tried was the Savix SW1210SG. This servo makes about 270 ounce-inches of torque at 5.5 volts. This one was pretty good, 270 ounce-inches. It could turn the vehicle, it could steer it. But I'll tell you what I did. I actually burned this thing up, and here's how I did it. It worked okay at 5.5 volts, but this is a high voltage servo. So what I did is I bought an external BEC, I wired it up, I powered it at 7.2 volts. The thing worked really well for about 10 minutes. For about 10 minutes it was great. Then after that it burned up, no good anymore. So I went and I got one of these Savix SA1283 SGs, and this thing makes about 400 ounce-inches of torque at 5.5 volts. This thing has plenty of torque, has no problem turning these wheels. So look for a servo that's about 400 ounce-inches, and I think you'll be fine. Second thing is the servo horn. The stock one is plastic. It strips out like in a matter of minutes. You'll strip that right out. So get rid of that. I bought a GPM kit with a metal servo horn, metal linkage. That solved that problem. Next issue is the bell crank, plastic, very flexible. You can see a lot of the flex in the steering comes from this thing. So get yourself a metal one. The hot racing one is nice. I bought it, but I didn't use it because I went with the Energy version, which I like because it has this U-shaped yoke. I think it supports the steering linkages a little better. But the hot racing one is fine. One little note, I will say this. I had to just make a very, very small modification to the this little cross link because, let's see if I can show you. What was happening, that thing would rub against the gearbox. So I didn't like that. So I just shaved it down a little bit so it doesn't rub against the gearbox, and that really freed it up quite a bit. I think I would have had to do that with the hot racing bell crank as well. Other things, when you're installing this, make sure all your bearings are all pressed in and seated, inside these little pockets really well. Make sure they're fully seated. Otherwise, when you tighten this thing all down, the bulkhead, it'll rub a little bit. I replaced the stock linkages up here with metal ones. That really helps stiffen it up quite a bit. The only thing I'll say is the GPM end didn't fit in the Integy yoke, so I wound up having to get some of the spare parts from the Yeti spare parts kit, and I swapped out the GPM link end with the Yeti link end, and that fit in there just right. If you use the stock steering links, it would still be pretty good, but I want it to go with the metal ones to stiffen it up. When you're setting up your steering, you really got to take your time to get everything centered. If you don't have it centered, you'll find that it'll turn really good to the right, but it won't turn well to the left, or vice versa. Took me about an hour of messing around with it, but once you get it all centered up, it'll turn pretty well left and right. And I have a pretty good turning radius now with this thing, either way. You can see that servo is so strong, it has no trouble, even with this thing sitting still, has no problems turning those wheels. All right, let's see, what else? One last little tidbit. I'll say, when you're working on your servo, when you have it all disassembled, I would recommend drilling a little hole in the bottom of that housing where the servo sits That way if you get water in there, it'll drain out. So I just drilled a little tiny drain hole. That might protect your servo from getting destroyed if you get this thing wet or if you run it in snow. Other things that help the steering, I put this Hot Racing rear sway bar kit on. That helps keep the front right tire on the ground when you're accelerating. That helps a lot. I really like that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the steering. All those things, I'm pretty happy with it now. I really like this thing. I'll have some videos at the end of me talking where I've run this thing in the dirt. You can see it in action. I think it steers pretty well now. Other little things that I did to it, not really steering improvement related, but I think are cool. I put the Hot Racing 17mm locking hub kit on it. I like that. It works really well. That'll keep the wheels on it, keep them from flying off. I also put the Hot Racing steering knuckles and all that stuff on here. I don't know. The stock ones were probably okay, but I went with the metal ones because I don't know. It's just, I thought it would be a good idea. But other than that, everything is stock, and I think it works pretty well. Everything on the back end of it is tough. I haven't busted anything on the back end of this yet. It's pretty strong. And I think the front end's pretty strong now too, and it can steer, so good stuff. All right, let me throw some clips of this thing running in the dirt and let you check that out. I'm sorry.
Did you get the shot?
Got shot in the eye.